The Brits who were listening, first of all, congratulations for being British. CFAX was a teletext service. So it was a service that we had on our televisions that allowed us to bring up, it's sort of like a browser. We could bring up a browser over the image, the television, and actually it had a mixed mode. So you could still be watching your movie and reading CFAX, but it was like a proto-internet service that delivered text and graphics to our television.
But am I picturing a DOS interface? Like this is 1970s,
Yeah,
80s?
yeah, this would be the 80s. Think about the Windows command prompt, color coded, and then the page fragmented into sections, and then a directory that I could navigate to using my remote to read sports, to read news, entertainment. And so instead of a URL, you were really punching in a page number. And generally, my sport pages would have been at 300s. From 300 to 325, I'd have the different sport pages, for example. And so I could surf the internet in CFAX. And so when the internet came along, it took me a while to draw parallels, but I always feel like CFAX doesn't get the tribute and the respect that it deserves for being the internet before the internet.
Interesting. I mean, it sounds like AOL keywords and all of that kind of stuff eventually. That's like you didn't go to Coca-Cola.com. You searched AOL keyword Coke or whatever. Like it sounds like if you knew your sports pages were 302 to 307, that's weird.
That's my tribute. So tribute to CFAX. Well done.
Amazing. It is the most British thing to have had the internet early. Like I think of England as either you had a fax machine in 1967 or you were still using fax machines in 2017. You're either way ahead of the curve and no one knew about it, or you're still painfully behind the curve. That's the most British thing.
Yeah, it's also the most British thing to be trumped and lose the credit, right? So
Yeah.
you like medicine and good healthcare, you're welcome. But we're not generally regarded as being the creator of these things. But I can say, at least say, joking aside, CFAX was the internet.
Sure. Interesting. All right. Gonna just edit out the part where we ignore like Chinese medicine and all of that kind of stuff, but sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's my MO. Complete denial.
Welcome to the British Empire.
Exactly. Exactly.
Welcome to Acceptance Criteria, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how software gets made and how we can all do a better job together. My name is Kevin Thomas Euland, and across the Zoom from me is Andrew Greener. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
Amazing.
We're also here to get deeper on the human element. I could go on for an eternity about people and how they think about the process of building complex systems. And I can't think of two better people to do that.
Sure, let's go with that for today. On this week's show, we'll be talking about the successes and failures of the Agile Framework and probably annoying a lot of Agile diehards. Oops. Do we need to warn people that you have a very strong opinion and this episode is rated R for significant feedback on Agile?
Yeah, it might be that I'm overly critical of Agile during this conversation, and I don't mean to be, but in the same vein as being about the human elements, I think it's not necessarily my grumblings on the principles and the manifesto itself. It's on our application and understanding and actually at times lack of interest to adapt it and make it our own. So yeah, you'll hear me grumble.
So it's kind of like communism. It's an interesting idea, but human beings have never once implemented it correctly.
Absolutely. That's a perfect example. Thank you.
There you go. But before we get to all of that, let's take a short break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. This is a segment we like to call Process Stories, where we talk about systems and frameworks that software teams use to get their work done. Today's topic is going to be the Agile Framework. For those of you who don't know, the Agile Framework is a process, well, I shouldn't even say process. It's a literal manifesto written, at this point, 2 decades ago? Quite some time ago, that tries to find ways for engineering teams to stop doing what used to be called waterfall. I guess it's still called waterfall. I should just start this whole segment over again. So waterfall was this very process heavy, we spend 3 months doing doing analysis. We spend another month and a half doing requirements, documentation. We tell a bunch of things that are all very well figured out ahead of time. You have a year, maybe 18 months worth of roadmap, and you know everything that you're going to do. And then engineers basically are given a cookbook and told, here are the recipes that you must now execute for us. And the Agile framework came in and said, no, actually, we want to be more responsive. We want to be able to deliver software much more quickly than that so that we can learn what we do right and wrong. And rather than waiting 6 months for the next release, we release it very frequently and we get that feedback from people quickly and we make changes. And so it wrote out a bunch of ways to organize your teams, created whole brand new roles within organizations, and recommended ways that they have the ability to be, they called it agile because you wanted to be fast and responsive and get things done. That was a very glowing, friendly version of how to summarize agile. I'm sure Andrew is going to have a different version of this. So Andrew, take it away.
No, I actually like that. That was pretty good.
Okay.
I think my main question around agile will sound pretty controversial though. I'm gonna hazard to push the limits on this one and ask you: is agile a failed experiment? And some of my reasons for asking you that would be revisiting the original principles of the manifesto. And for anybody that doesn't know the principles, we'll be getting into some of them, not all of them. But I think at the top, one of the most important ones for me is the highest priority being set on the satisfaction to the customer involving early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So valuable software, we're assuming there's quality and the business value is there, but it's the first principle in the manifesto, and I'm yet to be convinced that I've worked anywhere. I've read articles of places that have done it or claim to have done that, but I'm yet to have worked anywhere where I've actually seen a good example of that first principle being met. So I ask you again, Kevin, is Agile a failed experiment?
Technically, a well-run experiment can't fail. It can just challenge your original hypothesis. And so I think I'll rephrase the question, which is, what are the results of the Agile experiment? Which is, their hypothesis was that you could have engineering teams doing all of these things to allegedly deliver the value more quickly. And I would agree with you that I think, well, one, you and I tend to work in a business to business, B2B software space. And I would say Agile, if it's going to have benefits, would typically be in a consumer oriented space. Like if you're Facebook and you have 1 million people coming to your site every day, you can pull out 1 million of them and you still have 999 million getting the regular experience. And you want to go and quickly iterate on whether or not the photo upload button works slightly differently on a test group of 1 million people. You get a ton of great data doing that, and you don't harm the 99% of your business. And so you can quickly go and screw up. The whole point of Agile is you go and release a thing that is not very well documented. You're trying to get feedback from people. You're trying to be quick and responsive, and you don't have a 6-week plan to do this. Agile sprint is 2 weeks. They are trying to make small, quick changes and learn from it. And if you're just Facebook trying to make a button slightly more effective and getting photos and videos into your site quicker, then maybe that's actually okay. But I don't think most of us are Facebook.
Yeah, these are valid questions, points you're bringing up. You're right. The B2C space makes much more sense to me. But let's focus on B2B for a second, because that's where we both are today, where we've been in the last decade.
Sure.
And the interesting thing there is that the agility is gone, right? The 2-week sprint gets you 2 weeks closer to the goal, but there's really not a ton of agility in that sprint to say, hey, market shift, put everything down, let's be agile and start to focus on this new area. It's potentially more agile than waterfall, but at some point you've lost your agility. Now you've got rigidity, which is similar to waterfall. And at some point, now you have poorly run waterfall, right? So you're getting closer and closer to the line of what waterfall, let's say it's quarterly. I'm working in this linear fashion for a quarter in waterfall, and then I'm delivering something. In Agile, if you lose that agility to the point of it being a quarter to actually flip and change and refocus your efforts, now you're back into the same timeline for waterfall. So where's the agility in that?
Well, I mean, if you're a business customer paying a company to have software that you use to help run your own company, I mean, I would assume Google Docs and Google Sheets and stuff are run in an agile way, but to a certain degree, I would hope they can't be too agile, because if my spreadsheet doesn't calculate the formula correctly for 3 days while they've been testing out a new experiment to figure out if some new feature works, that sucks. Like, if I'm a business customer, don't I want stability? Don't I maybe only want quarterly releases? I'm not sure I want agility in my releases, but that doesn't necessarily mean my engineering teams can't work that way and try to, I don't know, I think that's the tricky thing with agile in the business is, I would imagine if you have enterprise contracts with massive companies, and even not necessarily massive companies, even small businesses and mid-sized businesses, you want stability in your software. And I think agile isn't necessarily trying to be destabilizing, but I don't think that they are focused on one of the principles in here. I'm looking at the four that I pulled out here. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Sure, they're trying to prioritize getting user feedback quickly and not necessarily having a 16-step process to do that. So you want to be quick. Okay, I'm not sure you have to give up process though. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Okay, but if I'm a business user and you don't tell me how the new button works, why did you release the new button? Documentation, I can understand documentation used to take forever and is hard to do maybe, but you're, I don't know. Like, I wonder, as a person paying a company significant dollars to get software, don't I want something more stable than that?
Yeah, I'll go back to your point about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. But my observation over the last 10 to 15 years has been those individuals having more interactions. And the first thing they do at the sign of trouble is they start to build more processes and tools. So they actually.
Right, you've shifted the processes and tools from your engineering team onto your customers to burden them with the new weird thing that you tried to roll out and test for 2 weeks.
Yeah, and so it's almost like the next ice age, right? Like the humans are wiped out, a few survive. The ice eventually starts to thaw out, and those humans forget where they've come from, and they start to say, "Well, how can we do it differently?" And they don't. Inevitably, they end up doing it the same way, and they realize, or they should realize, is that actually those processes and tools were put there for a reason. It's because our individuals and the interactions they had didn't yield the results that we wanted. And so I'm curious if we just wipe the slate clean, and it's fine if we did, we can rebuild some of waterfall mentality in a new, improved, better, maybe leaner way. But I'm starting to see that old waterfall creep back in again. I'm starting to companies producing the workflow diagrams and the revisitation of the principles that we all took in college with the UML diagrams and how do I do UML. Not quite as heavy as UML. I'm not going to go as low as the class diagram and the field levels, but I still need my system component diagrams. So I'm starting to see that creep back in again. And I just wonder whether that individuals and interactions over processes and tools is really just an evolution.
First, I do like this TV pilot that you're pitching about the post Ice Age rebuilding technology world. That's interesting. We should follow up on that later. I think if you look at the reasons why people wanted agile, engineering teams were understandably frustrated by having black boxed at the top of the company decide why they should go and build the shiny new thing, and they were given very detailed instructions about how to go and build the shiny new thing, and those instructions were written by people who were not technical. And so a lot of the times you had executives and product people making decisions without looping engineering in to figure out, could you actually build this thing that we've just sold to a bunch of customers? And so Agile was saying, no, you need to loop engineering into this process, give engineering the freedom, give software developers the creativity to go and create a thing. And I think that's an understandable and desirable outcome. But to your point, that doesn't mean we have to get rid of a bunch of the other stuff. So you can still let engineers participate and be creative. You don't necessarily need to be on a 2-week sprint cycle and skipping all of the other stuff.
Yeah, and I think you make me think here too. Part of my challenge with agile and engineers is that it's become about the 2-week sprint. It's become about the stand-ups, and it focuses in that individuals and interactions. But actually, as an enterprise architect, some of the challenges is how you build those systems agile, right? If I'm
Right.
releasing, if I have continuous delivery, then I'm assuming that I'm releasing little bits of a grander idea. I'm releasing little features over time, and I can do some testing along the way to see how the users and the customers enjoy the experience, and I can make adjustments to that. But I don't see a lot of evidence that engineers are at that next level for thinking about how to build software in that way, or they're inheriting old systems that just weren't inherently built that way. Can you really go back? Is it like building test cases into code that was written 15 years ago? Is anybody really going to go back and make this adjustment so that the technology is also flexible enough to be agile?
I think that's a good point of just what they really should have rolled out was agile for startups, agile for enterprises, agile for they needed different versions because if you are a startup, you probably do want to release a new version of this thing every 2 weeks and get that feedback. I would argue if you are a bigger company, being able to release smaller functionality even if it's just internally and you're going to go and do a focus group with users and see how you're not rolling it out to the entire business, but you're bringing in some customers and showing them the new thing and getting their immediate feedback and not needing to wait for the entire quarter. There are benefits to that, even if you're not necessarily fully updating your software for everybody. I can see some benefits to it, but I think the problem I have is that Agile fundamentally, because it was a single framework trying to be implemented by all types of businesses with all histories of software, like you were saying, I'm not going to go back and write unit tests for code that was written 15 years ago, and we should probably be willing to adapt it for that. And I think that's the thing is, in Agile's defense, I'm not sure it was always meant to be prescriptive for everybody. It was meant to be a manifesto, and then you go and take the theories and the tenets of it and apply it to your business in the way that makes sense. And instead, what we ended up with is this rigid framework that everyone must follow in this exact way that it was laid out, and you don't have that flexibility to adapt. The other thing that I think you run into is because Agile was so focused on the types of teams that were trying to solve those specific types of problems at the time, is they didn't include things like user experience. UX designers are nowhere in the Agile framework. So you now are expecting engineers to build a mobile app and understand how to get a mobile app to effectively communicate information to consumers. And that's not an engineer's skill set necessarily. There's a reason that UX design is an entire team and skill set and speciality. What's the word I'm trying to say? Specialty that people go and have entire careers around, because that's a dedicated skill set. I'm not expecting an engineer to figure out how I would lay out complex information in an iPhone screen. So the fact that Agile doesn't include a bunch of these things is mind-boggling to me, because how are you expecting... And that's why people start building out diagrams and doing wireframing and doing all of these things, is because they've realized I don't have anybody in an Agile framework doing that for me. The product owner is so focused on user stories and telling me the why and the who that I don't have anybody filling this out. I don't know. There's so many roles missing. There's so many things that don't make sense that I wish people could look at it and say, these are some really good ideas. I want engineering involved earlier. I want us to be able to get feedback earlier. Now, how would we apply that to our business? And we don't do that. We just all try to have scrum masters on 2-week sprint cycles and daily stand-ups.
Yeah, good points. They're good points, and I feel like so many companies believe they're agile because they checked a few of the boxes and they're happy to continue. And the minute they hit pain, you've sort of introduced a whole set of new anti-patterns in the process. They're almost like these agile anti-patterns now, where the finger pointing starts, and you have a lot of the old problems. But I almost wonder if there's a nice framework, a better framework for, to your point, like the startup business, right? Probably the easiest place to go agile and release continuous delivery, right? Quality, talk to your customers, really have that interaction. I think it was a lot easier when we were in person in a bullpen. You had all the experts around to say, "Hey, you got a gap right there. Let me sit with you for 2 hours, and we can close that gap on your lack of understanding." I just wonder, yeah, I think when you climb to those big enterprises and B2B company, even entities like the IRS, and government agencies, not to pick on those guys, but I wonder with an entity like the IRS, which has a very small window for actually updating their systems and releasing features on their platform, a place where you would really like to see Agile because they could probably get a few features out this year and a few more next year. But I just can't imagine those places having an easy track of moving from the old. And then, like most systems that are in transition that haven't got to a good place, they're almost in a more dangerous place now because they just have bad process, right? They have a bad agile experience, and the quality goes down. And actually, it's very difficult to even measure the dangers of that type of software and processes.
Well, and how much of it is the people who are, again, this comes back to like you need flavors of agile, because if you are a larger company that is trying to move and trying to realize the benefits of this, but all of your engineers, all of your product managers, you don't have product owners necessarily, so you're trying to find people to fill in these roles. And even if you don't need to do every 2 weeks releasing a new feature, but you do want to get user testing internally, so you want to do more rapid releases, even that requires a different product manager skill set. Being able to think about features and break it down into, okay, well, if I could deliver the ability to sort the list of things, search through the list of things, filter the list of things, and I have these 7 things that I wish I could do on this one screen. In that situation, you as a product manager in a waterfall world don't need to worry about, well, I don't get enough value out of just sorting, and I get a ton of value out of filtering. But in an agile world, you have to figure out that there's no point in putting in front of a user focus group a screen that only sorts the table. They're going to be frustrated by the fact that they can't search the table, they can't filter on the table, they can't add rows to the table. So you as a product manager now need to actually do a deeper analysis of your users and your personas and understand what's the value that I'm providing to them. The problem that they really have is they can't find the information that they need. Okay, that means filtering is the most important thing. Sorting can help in that process, but I couldn't deliver it on its own. And so if you want to be agile, you also have to build up these skill sets that are different than waterfall. And so companies going through the transition aren't supporting the people who have to go through that transition with them. They're just sticking them in this new role and being puzzled why 6 months later agile hasn't worked out for them.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it actually leads into the question I was gonna ask you. Do you think that we've cheated the people by not training the real principles of agile as they relate to the environment you're moving into? I can seem pessimistic at times about humans, right, repeating the same mistakes in the digital space, but I'm fairly optimistic in that if we teach them what we're trying to do and the principles of something, the best will surface. And that's actually one of the principles, right? Building processes around the motivated individuals. So if we train them on the environment and the flavor of agile that we're looking for, do those people then become evangelists and energized and seek to improve the agile environment of where they are? And is that the first mistake, is not having your own agile manifesto and teaching that to your employees?
Right. Fully agreed. I think the problem is probably that is so custom that as if you're the person in charge of that and you know where to go but not how to get there, then you're just stuck on the starting line because you're just, okay, well, sure, I'd love if my product managers could get more agile. Who teaches them that? Not me. So who's it going to be? Am I going to bring in outside consultants? Am I going to have enough skill set? I'm a CPO who wants to protect my job. I've been fully on board with this transition to agile, but I don't know how to get my people there. And that's not a dig on that CPO. They also need the training, right? So depending on who you are, how do you support that idea? Of course we should do that. That's more budget. So this idea of transitioning to agile was a free idea. We're going to just do this thing. Now, actually, the transition to agile is going to cost us $1 million because we have 112 people to put through, LinkedIn learning courses. I don't know. How do you do that? And because you want to customize it to your version, and Agile isn't giving you Agile for startups, Agile for the SMB, Agile for the mid-market, Agile for enterprise. If Agile was giving you a bunch of different, the French cookbook and the Italian cookbook and the English, there's no such thing as an English cookbook. Sorry, I'm allowed to make fun of him because he's some form of British. I'm not sure. Manchester, maybe? I've never actually asked you.
Yeah, Manchester. That's close enough.
That sounds right. All right, cool. But that's the thing is, how as a company are you supposed to do that? Of course you might want to support your people. Are we talking about opening our own product and engineering consulting organization right now, Andrew? Because I think we'd probably be wildly successful helping people figure this out. Because how do you know what the skills are if you're also a waterfall person?
Yeah, because I was part of the original wave. I was part of the original agile wave. I was tearing cube walls down and building bullpens in '02 in financial services. And look, I'm super biased towards financial services. People will start to understand that over time because for all of the sleaziness that goes on certain sides of financial services, the technology industry couldn't really afford to be, too out of shape, right? So the first version of Agile that I went through was close to the principles. It was human. It was tearing down walls. It was even agile in the sales pitch. It was saying, we're not going to show you any statistics on why this is better. There's no metrics to be had. Just trust us, right? You're
Yikes.
gonna love talking to the person that has been on the other side of the cube wall all these years. You're just gonna love it. And so I was part of this true. We all understood the principles when we were doing it, and I think there's almost an assumption now that there is nothing else. So when you're hiring engineers and they come into your place of work, never mind your own flavor of agile, they don't even know the vanilla flavor of agile. So in the same way, there are certain police officers who've maybe been working in a public sector and guarding a library. If I was to ask them to read me the Miranda rights after 20 years, would they remember them? So if I ask an engineer who's been all over the place and I've just assumed they've come through Agile, if I was to ask them the most important principles, would they still remember them? Would they be able to live and breathe them? And I think not, right? So
Right.
when you go into a brand new company, maybe we start with some of the vanilla. Here's the top 4. Here's the top 5. I do have another question for you, though.
Shoot.
Even in the failed ecosystems, there have been some successes. So what has Agile given birth to, right? Like from a process point of view, what are some of the positives that you've seen come out of Agile that seem consistent across all the flavors of Agile? What could you call out today?
I think engineers getting to be more creative is absolutely a win for Agile. Agile was already going by the time most of my career had started, so I don't have a ton of experience with true waterfall engineers other than some sort of anecdotes from my mom who worked in Silicon Valley in the 80s and 90s. But it does, from what I can tell, seem to help those engineers who want to be creative. I will say there's an entire breed of engineer who is very happy to be told what to do and just loves solving the problem in front of them and just going and coding away and getting to that answer. But at least half of engineers out there want to be involved in, like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Who are the people that want to solve it? Why is it good for the company for us to solve it? And they get to be creative and figure out, okay, I know we could go and do that thing that you're all talking about, but wouldn't it be cooler if we could do that through, some other, and they get to be part of the solution. And I think that is really valuable. You get smarter solutions when the people who actually have to figure out how to get really complex systems to do new things. That's really beneficial. And I think that helps.
So the pessimistic side of me then will say the trade-off is dangerous though, right? Because I've taken bored engineers and I've made them less bored. And maybe I found some talented engineers who had good design brains about them. But I've also introduced the idea that those that weren't bored and needed to have the requirements spelled out to them and just build, we've now allowed those people to control some of the element of design. And in critical systems, do we want those people to be making those decisions? And I think back to literature, like the inmates are running the asylum. I think from memory, if I recall, part of that was really what's happening in the sort of technology spaces when there isn't that good product and design leadership. Those people are now allowed to release into the world their bad ideas.
Well, yes. So I think that only works when you have good engineering management who can identify who is the junior resource who we're going to give a chance and let them explore, but also you're there monitoring what's going on and keeping on top of whether or not they're actually producing good ideas and good output. You are expecting, like you're saying, a good product person. And sometimes companies look at product owner, which is this role that in the Agile framework is everything. They are simultaneously the roadmap person, the requirements person. They are managing the backlogs and the daily tasks of people. The Scrum Master maybe helps with some of that, but now your product person doesn't have the time to do that. It's why Agile, I would fully say, is a failed experiment, if only because product management and UX design were basically excluded. Product owner was kind of this person. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm not going to malign the intentions of the original Agile framework authors, but product owner, in the way it's implemented most of the time, is the person you bully into just doing the task management and the project management, and you let the engineers run the asylum. And I think you need to have people, and that's not because of engineering having a lack of skill set that they couldn't develop. It's because you need people to do good work in the things that they are best at, and engineers are best at coming up with the solutions. Let someone else go and talk to customers for 3 weeks. Let someone else go and talk to users and understand that. Let the roles specialize. And so you're spending all of your time doing the thing you're really good at. And so product owner gets into, they're kind of doing everything and therefore they're doing nothing. And so to your point, you need good engineering management, you need good scrum management, you need good product management to help shape and say, yep, I know that if we went down this road, it's really cool. It'd be really fun to work on this new cloud-based blah, blah, blah. But does that deliver value to the user and to the company tomorrow? No. So we're not going to go down the flight of fancy. I'm sorry it won't be as cool doing this version of the feature. You got to have a little bit of the adult in the room. Sorry to put it so harshly, but that's a balancing act. The person pushes back and says, no, the cloud way, listen to me. This is what we're going to do, this, and this. And it's a collaboration. Agile is good at finding the ways to help people collaborate better than they did. But you do need those guardrails. You do need all of those roles participating. And I think that's the problem I have with Agile, is it excluded a ton of roles and just made it all on engineering's plate. And that's too much power in one group of people's hands.
Yeah, I get the sense that you and I are going to not get too many invites to Agile conferences anytime soon. Might be dangerous for us to attend. But I think the interesting thing is, though, we're not anti-Agile. I think it's that we see the complexity and the human and organizational changes that need to have taken place to support Agile. The principles in themselves are good. It's hard to argue with the principles, but a good example, when I think of what you were just talking about, is QA departments over the years and how they've changed with Agile. And I think about Agile in the sense of, it's like one of those, old factories where you've got the quality workers grabbing things off the belt as the product goes by, and that they're measuring things and saying that's not good, it doesn't pass the quality test. And Agile's so dangerous that you don't get that piece right. Those engineers that shouldn't be ever making product decisions, those things get by, right? And they really make it to production, and then you got a whole different type of problem. Like, some customers might actually like the dysfunction. And that's where I don't think in the past I'd seen this as frequently, but companies actually documenting known issues as part of their product release. There was always a KB articles, database, knowledge base, but I didn't think I'd ever seen anybody sort of document bugs in a system until Agile came along. And that's fairly scary.
Yeah, we are basically Protestants. We don't mind the underlying texts. We just wish the implementation of it was different. We have our 99 theses that we need to nail to the Agile Framework conference door. I do feel like this is, I could go on for eternity on this, of just, there are so many pieces of it that are good and I like what you're trying to do. I just don't know why, and I get why. I mean, at some point we'll talk about product managers and why people don't love working with product managers sometimes. There are reasons why some of these roles got excluded from Agile, but we all identified the same problem, and then I just don't love the way you solved it. I just want to tweak some of the ways that it got solved, and I think you can still be responsive. And I'm not even sure I would tell a startup. I'm not even sure I would tell Facebook. I'd tell Facebook to do a million different things, but I'm not sure if your goal is I want to test how a button works really quickly every 2 weeks and make iterative changes. This is great, but I don't think all businesses work that way. I don't know what the metaphor is here. My language-based cookbook is not a great metaphor, but I want flavors of Agile that help different types of teams deliver different types of software.
Agreed.
All right. Anything else we should do to tear down this church?
No, I don't think we're done with it, because I think there's a lot of subjects that will lead back to the Agile problems as we get into anti-patterns and different roles. I could go on for the next 20 years about this one. What's the hierarchy and what's the weight on the principles? Where it's like, hey, if business people and developers don't get together every single day, what's the compound effect to the principle below it? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And a lot of companies don't do that. They don't have product owners, right? Checking in saying, hey, can you demo that for me? So what's the compound problem that occurs after that? Who down the line is suffering? How are they suffering? The customer ultimately is at the end of the line. They're going to suffer, right? But then you start to go back into the challenge again, where it's cool, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. The first thing I want to do to these principles is apply processes and some tooling to understand the weights and measures of them. And so I think we're definitely going to revisit it.
And I think that's why, if I continue my possibly problematic religious metaphor, there aren't very many Amish communities. Like, pure Agile very rarely actually exists out there, because people run into these things and they're like, well, that's a little bit goofy. I'm allowed to use scissors on Sunday, so I'm going to slightly tweak it. And Listen, if you're a company that's been able to figure out how to make Agile work, great. That's awesome. But it's not the norm as far as I can tell.
Yep.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Acceptance Criteria. If you like what you heard, maybe go and drop 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and leave us a nice review. And if you didn't like what you heard, remember that the name of the podcast is My Brother, and Me. Also, tell your friends if you like the show and that they should check it out. Some of the best podcasts out there go by word of mouth, and we'd much appreciate it. And a friendly reminder that we are always interested in hearing questions directly from you, our listeners, for our segment User Stories. If you've got a scenario you'd like help with, whether it's working with an engineering or product team member, trying to figure out how to solve an agile process problem, or you just can't understand why your favorite app just updated everything and now it's terrible, we're here to talk it through with you. Just send those questions to acceptancepod@gmail.com and we might be able to help on a future episode. And we're happy to keep it anonymous so no one can trace it back to you if you end up talking a coworker or something. Follow us on Twitter and Blue Sky. We're at AcceptancePod. We'll post links to show notes and any articles from the blog onto that account. For now, I'm Kevin Thomas Euland, and you can find me on most apps at KThomasEuland. That's ULLAND.
And I'm Andrew Greener, and you can find me on most apps at Criteria Greener. That's GREINER. And this has been Acceptance Criteria. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you.